Such a joy to have you here today, Olafemi. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much, Katie. Really happy to be here too.
I think it's fascinating that you have this military background that you were in for 13 years, and now you coach also people in that field or people transitioning from that field, because that's obviously a transition you've made yourself. I'm curious, are there tools and mindset, I'm sure there are, that you use every day that come from your military background that support you in your life now?
Yeah, I think the military loves to talk about resilience. And I think the resilience that I learned as opposed to being in the Air Force, being an officer, kind of continually pushing myself through the difficult things, that definitely is something that I've maintained, very much so into what I'm doing now, working for myself.
I think resilience is so important, and I was actually reflecting on this topic today before joining our interview. I was thinking, yes, it'd be good to do something with resilience, because what I've seen is that people tend to think that we become resilient when we go through obstacles and we learn to challenge ourselves and push through our comfort zone. But I'm wondering, how can you balance this resilience but without pushing you so much that you burn out and crash?
Mm.
Because I also think, especially in the high performing industry, there are a lot of people who are high achievers, who constantly push themselves, who constantly go out of their comfort zone, and many of them burn out. So, how can we find this sort of nice balance?
Absolutely. That's a really good question, Katie. And I've definitely experienced that burnout myself when I did keep on pushing myself harder and harder, because that's what I felt like I needed to do in order to succeed, in order to get ahead and actually do the things that were expected of me. First of all, I think something that's really important is recognizing where your natural limits lie, not being afraid or resenting yourself for the fact that you do have those natural limits, because we're human, we're not machines. And even a machine has a limit to what it can handle. So learning, becoming more aware of what one's natural limits are, and not resenting yourself for having a place, a boundary where it's like, right, more than this, and I won't realistically be able to handle this anymore. So that's the first thing, awareness of where your limits lie. The second one is not being afraid to say no. Like, we can find different ways to do this. We can find maybe respectful ways to communicate the word no to whomever it is that we're talking to. But honestly, that's something that's really important to do, because again, a person might fairly or unfairly expect more from you in a given situation. And if you're spread among a number of different areas, then who knows, they might just not have sight of the other things that you do have going on. And likewise, when it's yourself that's tasking you, as is now the case, as I'm, for instance, working for myself now, I found it really important to cultivate ways of drawing boundaries for myself, realizing when I'm flagging, knowing when it's time to step away, not just fighting through, like realizing that there's nobody here that's going to tell me off if I don't sit at my computer for 3 hours straight or whatever. And therefore, it's okay to say, Femi, you're nodding, you're just going through the post-lunch slump, that kind of thing. Go away, put your head down for 15 minutes and come back again, and you'll be a hell of a lot better. So that kind of being honest with yourself, being forgiving of yourself, that you don't have infinite capacity, infinite energy. I think that's probably one of the most valuable things a person can learn.
Absolutely. And I love this, Femi. I love this compassion and mindfulness and sort of self-respect almost in that we take into account in such moments. So being able to see that we're not infinite, even though we'd like to be, we don't have infinite energy. And
Yeah.
this also means that we need to be a little more strategic in how we decide to place our time and our energy. Because if we have this awareness ahead of time, okay, these are my natural limits, as you call them. I like that, my natural limits. Therefore, how can I use that time that's available for me so that I can optimize as best as I can? Another
Absolutely.
topic. So I love what we were saying now about resilience and then also compassion. But something else that comes to mind when I think of a military background is thriving in a high pressured environment.
Mm,
So I imagine certain circumstances that have very high pressure. Maybe we need to act quickly or think quickly or make a fast decision. And I wonder, what tools do you have or ways of thinking? Maybe it's a perspective that help you to deal with high pressured environments.
mm. Yeah, so that's definitely something that all of us have a lot of experience with. The high pressure, working to deadlines, even when you don't see the purpose of that deadline, just somebody has decided they want it by that point, and you have to deliver, or you feel like you have to deliver. And that's something that honestly can add the additional the additional challenge of frustration that comes with it when you don't necessarily see the reason for why it does need to be such high pressure. So, I mean, a strategy, sorry, that I've come away with bearing that in mind is asking myself the question, is this pressure required? Like, do I actually need to do it within this specific time frame or at the same time as all of these other things? Whether I'm working solo or if I'm working with other people, I think it's really important to actually pause and ask the question, is this pressure required? There are going to be some times that it is, just because of the ongoing situation. You might have been given something short notice because they've been given it short notice, and it's tying into or enabling something larger that you're not directly involved in. That might be the reality of things. Otherwise, like being in the military, we deploy, there might be literal lives on the line if we don't act decisively and quickly. And so that's something that you need to learn to integrate and work with without kind of going into panic mode. So I think, first of all, the question needs to be asked, do we need to go into this high pressure situation? Does it need to be as high pressure as it is right now? Because it's really important to have a normal operating level and then a higher level that you can move to, rather than operating at the higher level at all times, which just leads towards exhaustion and burnout. So bringing the level down whenever you can is really important. But then when the level does rise, I found it's really important to communicate with the people who are around you, manage their expectations, know that you understand their requirements, involve other people if you can, delegate what tasks are possible. There is nothing wrong with sharing the burden of responsibility, because we often find that what we produce is of greater value than what any of us individually might have produced along the way. And if you are working on your own, then taking opportunities to recover, to have some kind of rest when you can. That might be just 5 minutes of going outside, getting some fresh air on your face. When I was an instructor, I used to teach specialist training in the Air Force, and it was extremely high pressure. The training audience, who were junior officers, most of whom had just come through their basic training, were really hungry for information, but also they could be a very challenging audience. And so there were certain times where I might have been teaching, then I had to go back to my office to finish planning or requesting people's, senior officers' attendance at an upcoming graduation or whatever it had to be. And there was just a lot going on at the same time, all the time. And sometimes it was like, you know what, Femi, you're banging your head against the wall. Just step out of the building, take a walk around, a slow walk around, breathe, and then come back in and continue. Sometimes you need to take that time for yourself in order to keep operating at the high level that is required.
That's definitely something I practice on a daily basis. The pause, the walk. I do it after lunch. I do it whenever I'm feeling a bit stressed or overwhelmed. I just squeeze it in. And if I don't have the time, as in I have an upcoming call or appointment, I'll do just a really fast, like 5 minutes around my working environment just to clear my head. I really loved what you shared about the operating at different levels and not constantly performing or operating at this high pressured level, sort of keeping that as a reserve. I'll that'll stay with me, because I have a tendency, like most high achievers, high performers, put myself under a lot of pressure. And I think those two questions of, is this pressure really required now? In my case, very rarely lives at stake, and 99.9999% of the time, that pressure isn't required. It might just be required on the moment where I'm entering the stage to give a keynote. Okay, that's not the moment to, fall asleep. But aside from that, I think most of the time it's self-pressured. And then the second question would be like, in this moment or in this day or in this activity, can I be at my middle level, base level of just healthy performance, or do I need to switch up the gear? And I think if I could keep it, and I'm thinking for all the people listening, maybe you can also identify those situations. But in my case, if I can keep the high performance level only for keynote deliveries or podcast interviews or something where immediately right now I need to perform at a higher level, I think the rest of the time it would be quite good for my nervous system anyway to be more at the medium level. So I think that's really beautifully explained. And there's two things when I think of the military environment. There's the high pressure, but there's also the uncertainty. And I think in the last, several years, many people have had to learn to cope with uncertainty. So, what helps you on a daily basis to cope with uncertainty?
So both when I was serving and since then, there has been a lot of uncertainty. I mean, definitely anyone who started their own business would say that almost the entire thing is uncertainty. But then at the same time, as I think about it, a lot of the people whom I work with, or even I talk to prior to working with, who are service leavers, are dealing with a huge amount of uncertainty with the massive life changes that come with leaving the forces. So for me, I suppose what helps is to start with asking oneself questions. If this uncertainty is coming up, how comfortable am I with it? If I'm uncomfortable, where does that discomfort come from? And what can I therefore do to reduce that discomfort and to make me feel a bit more able to deal with it? So for me, when that uncertainty is coming, a large amount of the uncertainty arises from the unknown, not knowing what to expect, not knowing what might happen, what I might have to do given certain circumstances. And so for me, one of the most important things is to kind of do that thinking, to understand what it is that I feel the need to know, to feel comfortable with what's coming up, and then to go out and do that research. I personally prefer to either watch things like instructional videos or to talk to people. So something that I did in starting out the business was to reach out to a number of coaches and a number of ex-military service people, even before I left actually, to find out what they went through, what they did in order to prepare themselves, what they wished they'd known of when they first started or before they started, things that they wish they could kind of send back through time to help them be a bit better by the time they reached this point, in order to kind of educate myself when leading up to this really big uncertainty for myself, which was starting this business. And when I'm coaching other people, that's one of the really big things that I work on as well with them, to help them identify what it is that's unclear for them, where they can find that information, and how to then go out, obtain the information that they need, and incorporate it into whatever they're doing now. So there's always going to be a level of uncertainty. The only question for each of us is how much uncertainty we're comfortable with. And then the next question that follows from that is, okay, now I know how much I'm comfortable with, or I have a feeling, what can I do to reduce that discomfort?
Yeah, so having more information so we can reduce that level of uncertainty, and then being able to sort of still be okay with the last part of uncertainty that's left, which, I mean, I think if we're honest with ourselves, everything is always uncertain. We just don't think of it that way. I mean, we don't know we'll wake up in the morning, like on a realistic level. And so it's we choose to have structures and frameworks that give us an illusion of control and certainty. So I think it's recreating that illusion. I
Absolutely.
firmly believe everything is totally uncertain. Anyway, great points. Really like this. And if you think now in your current transition, working as a coach, what are some of the core obstacles and core challenges that you see people dealing with?
Hmm. Well, first of all, I might refer back to the comment you made just now as to the illusion of control that a lot of people have. That's something that I've spoken about before, and I've dealt with before as well. We feel like we're in control of so much around us, but I think that's more based on familiarity with the situation, because there are going to be so many things that come up that surprise us and we don't have direct control over. So that illusion of control and then the perception of a sudden lack of control, in my experience with coaching, is one of the biggest hurdles that people tend to come up against when they're transitioning out of the forces. But then for a lot of other people as well, you don't have to be making a massive career change or life change. But then everyone does go through life changes of various different kinds. There's just more of a feeling or less familiarity with what you're doing, and therefore you have more of a perception of that lack of control, I would say. In terms of the people that I coach or service leavers when they're leaving the forces, big challenges for them tend to include things like you've been in this organization for years, sometimes for decades, and the military is like a bubble. People within the organization dress a certain way, wear uniform. Even when you're out of uniform, you're kind of expected to dress in a certain way when you're in like the public areas. I remember sometimes on a weekend wearing a t-shirt and tracksuit bottoms and thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like super dressed down, because it's just not natural after a while. So that's one side of things, how you present yourself, how you communicate, the words that you use, the way you arrive in the workplace, the way you write emails. So a lot of the time when, say, emailing civilians, they tend to find military people as very abrupt and to the point, almost to the point of being rude. Whereas we, on the military side, find a lot of civilians as overly flowery and honestly wasting time where it comes to their writing style. You just kind of want people to get to the point. And so coming out where there's what's on the outside, how a person presents themselves, how they dress, etc. Then there is how they communicate, how they talk to each other. We have to learn to slow down and to flower up our language a hell of a lot more. That's the way I might describe it. Interacting with other people, the banter that so many people are used to in the military, which I would admit sometimes goes a bit far, and yet there's still almost always an understanding of very early on in a relationship, kind of being able to laugh at, in the kindest way, laugh at attributes of another person, then kind of laugh at attributes of yours, and that can be seen as a bonding exercise. You go to the outside and realize that suddenly you're insulting everyone and nobody wants to work with you or be around you because you've just been mean for no reason. That's something that I definitely had to learn, and I'm not even a big person where it comes to this kind of banter, you know. So for certain other people for whom this is more central to their military experience, that would be a really big habit to learn to get out of. And then, of course, there's the fact that with knowing what they're doing, like being in a trade or a profession for all these years that they've been in so far, what are they actually going to do with themselves outside of the forces? What is worth their time and energy? What will be their larger motivation, their mission in the world going forward? They're not given a mission anymore. So what do they decide their mission is? What do they believe in enough to dedicate their life to it going forward? Something that's quite unfortunate is when I hear service people simply saying, oh, I just want a job, just any job. And I know that's not going to be enough. That's never going to be enough for them, because they've had a higher calling, you might say, while they've been serving for all these years. And so they need to find something that actually fulfills them, that lights them up, that gives them that feeling of service that they've had all of this time while they have been in the services, so that they can really feel like their life is progressing in a way that allows them to keep growing as a human being once they're out in the wider world.
I think that's something that everyone needs, but maybe isn't aware of. This need for growth, progress, contribution,
Yeah.
and this overall meaning and focus on something that's a little more outside of our own zone. But I think that growing up, maybe it depends on people's education, but there was
Mm,
a strong emphasis on learn some stuff and then get a job, earn money,
mm,
and provide for your family. So I feel the way we were educated as a whole in society, but then again, I don't know all educational systems, but we're very focused on develop your own skills, have that as a toolbox, then sell it, get a job, and be happy with the money you bring in and help your family and have fun from time to time, go on the odd holiday, and that's it. And we haven't necessarily been taught that true happiness, fulfillment comes from feeling the sense of progress and contribution at the same time. I know that in my previous job as an engineer, when I worked at sea, it was quite enjoyable and I earned some money and it was quite fun. But after a while, I felt it was always the same skills and I felt I wasn't growing or learning anything new. And this is something I'd never thought about when getting a job. I just thought, you get a job. And since being an entrepreneur is not something that crosses my mind that I'm not learning enough. I think every single day is a learning curve. And that's probably what I love most actually about being an entrepreneur, both the learning and obviously it's all service oriented. We try and,
mm.
transform people's lives. So I think that's a pretty nice calling.
Definitely. Yeah. I definitely would agree with that as well in terms of the being of service and progress, like learning and progressing. And ironically, that's the reason for why a lot of people leave the military, because they might feel like they come to a point where they're no longer progressing or they're not able to progress. So they might get to a certain rank and it's not realistic, maybe because of their age, maybe because of the fact that promotion in their area happens to be very slow, and therefore their work may not go beyond the point at which they are now. Or it may simply be that they've done it for this many years and they want something different. It's no longer stimulating enough for them. And so, really interesting that that might be a really significant reason for why they choose to leave. But then they've forgotten that when they're going out to actually look for new work or a new profession for themselves. And they're now thinking, oh, I'll just get a job. If I just do this job that 10,000 people have done before, then I'll be fine. Not realizing that what they were missing was something that really kind of gave them that spark of inspiration. And it's that inspiration that's really going to help them to create the kind of life that they want to continue living on the outside.
What made you leave the military?
So somewhat complicated for me. So all the way back in 2016, I think it was, the first time I considered leaving the Air Force was having had a horrible boss, basically. So I'd unfortunately experienced bullying only for a few months, but that affected me for years afterwards. I spent quite a long time working to kind of recover from that and overcome it. I know at the time I'd experienced anxiety, um, a lot of dread when thinking about going into work. I had things like memory lapses, which, when you're working in classified environments, can have very, severe consequences, that kind of thing. Um, and unfortunately, within that situation, I didn't feel supported by the other seniors that were around me. It didn't feel like there was anyone that I could go to for help. I did attempt to, but I didn't receive the support that later on I realized that should have been owed to me. Um, at the time, I decided not to leave because I didn't want to feel like I was forced out. I wanted to eventually leave because I wanted to, for my own choices. And additionally, I wanted to do what I could to be there for other people who had gone through similar experiences like myself. That's not to say that that kind of experience is endemic or particularly common, but it does happen, as it happens in certain other workplaces. And that kind of experience I've heard from other people that I've spoken to, within my own coaching as well. And so I was grateful for the fact that even while I was still serving, I could use my own experiences to help lend strength to other people who are overcoming those kinds of challenges themselves, so that they could continue on in whatever way that they wanted to get through that difficult situation, realize that they weren't the problem and that there was hope at the end of the tunnel, that there was always hope. As time progressed, I started to kind of go back to my degree, which was in psychology. And I'd previously wanted to be a counselor. But then towards the end of my first degree, when I learned, I say my first degree, my only degree, when I learned that to be a counselor, you effectively had to study for a whole extra degree, I thought, I don't have time for this. Really wasn't willing to just stay in education for even longer at the age of 21, 22, as I was at the time. So joined the Air Force, which was my alternate option, and was content to serve for as long as I did. I was in for 13 years in the end, but at roughly the 8-9 year mark, I would say, I started to go back to the thoughts of what I wanted to achieve through psychology, through working with people as a counselor. And then I eventually learned about coaching and the difference between counseling and coaching, and that, counseling is quite rearward looking, it's healing past traumas, it's helping to understand oneself and how a person's past can affect them today. And that 100% has a place. I have total respect for it. Whereas coaching, on the other hand, when it's forward-looking, it's proactive, it's looking at what someone can be and how they can move forward and shape their future, that was something that just really excited me. So 2018, I started doing my coaching course, and it was within that time that I then decided that this is really what I want to do outside of the forces. And as time went on, and I felt like I'd kind of had enough of my military career, that was when I decided that this was the time to start leaning more firmly into the coaching as opposed to the military. And so started to work towards transitioning out.
Beautiful. What a beautiful journey. It's so interesting. People always ask me how I went from being an engineer at sea to being a coach. And it is fascinating to hear people's journeys and what helps them to pivot. And now, in your role as a coach, what brings you the most joy?
I think probably similarly to a lot of coaches, it's when you see those, what we call aha moments, when you see people have real transformations, when they suddenly, maybe you ask a question in a certain way, or you might even repeat back to them something that they have just said, and they kind of pause, and you see the cogs turning in their head as they think to themselves, I've never thought of it like that before. I never had that understanding of this. And it's like there's a shift internally. And so that kind of realization, that kind of aha moment, as someone's status quo, their internal world moves, and all of a sudden new possibilities are open to them. They realize things that they hadn't considered or they hadn't thought were possible for them. All of a sudden, might they be possible? Could they direct themselves towards these things that they never thought were for them beforehand? I know I've experienced that before. And when I see that in other people and they realize that the world is so much of a bigger place than they considered before, that's just really exciting, really energizing.
Amazing. I love that. We're already approaching the end of today's episode. It's been wonderful, Femi. I love everything you shared about thriving in a high pressure environment, dealing with uncertainty, resilience, also hearing about your own journey. What would you like to leave the audience with? What last nugget can you leave them with to support them in moving forward and taking next steps in their lives?
Yeah, I'd probably say to the audience that, branching out from everyone that I've worked with and from my own experience and from, having been coached myself, I would probably say that you're capable of more than you think you are. And in your journey towards that, be forgiving when you can't immediately do it all first time round, because we all stumble, we all have failures. And I really like the mnemonic, a failure is actually a first attempt in learning. So in actual fact, a failure can be a really good thing, and it can help to really spur you forward and give you information that you didn't have before. So give yourself the opportunity to fail by going for those things that seem a bit scary to you, that seem a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Expand your comfort zone over time and realize just how much more you're capable of.
That's beautiful. It brought tears to my eyes. Femi, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom. Thank you, Femi.
Thank you very much, Katie.